Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's nice to see members of the community and students here. We appreciate you being here. It's Thursday, November 21st, and I will call this meeting to order. May I have a motion to return to public session? Thank you, Rory, seconded by Scott. All in favor? 7-0. Terrific. And would everybody please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance?
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Terrific, thank you. Tonight we're looking forward to our annual presentation of student achievement across the district and also an update on our response to intervention plan before we have the opportunity to adopt a revised RTI plan. Before we turn our attention to the presentation, I will just ask that we go around quickly for board announcements, and then for anybody who's here waiting to speak during public forum, we will turn our attention to public forum right after our presentation. Bill, actually, Aiden, welcome back. May I start with you if you have any announcements tonight?
Yeah, no report for tonight.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Bill?
I was part of the high school tour on Monday, and it's always impressive to me. It's like running a city. There's so many things going on, from the teachers to the students to the staff, the maintenance staff, and just keeping it running, keeping it open, it's always very impressive. And one of the highlights was this room, which I was encouraged also to see that it was already being used quite a bit. So that tour is nothing but positive things to see in terms of the coursework. I've always sensed that pretty much no matter what somebody's passion is, they'll find something to match that here. So that made me feel good.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for the kind words. Rory?
I have nothing tonight, Marjorie. Thank you.
Thank you. Liz?
I just want to echo what Bill said. The high school tour was great. It's wonderful to see the students in action. And yeah, there were a lot of them in the library. So it was nice. It was nice to see it used and to see it used how it's supposed to be.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'll just underscore, thank you to the high school administration and to our administrators for taking the time to walk with us through the building, to our teachers for opening their classrooms, and congratulations, Katona Lewisboro, on this library. It really is a pleasure to be back. So thank you so much for all that went into this renovation. It looks great, and it was terrific to see the students and some teachers already using the space. Andrew, how about you?
Yep, a couple quick things.
Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, congratulations last week to the cast and crew and the directors of the John Jay Middle School productions of Julius Caesar and Comedy of Errors. A number of us had a chance to go see those shows. They did a really great job with both. So congratulations to all. And tomorrow night, right here in the high school, both tomorrow night and Saturday matinee and Saturday night, performances of You Can't Take It With You, the Kaufman and Hart play. I think they're rehearsing even as we speak right now. I'm sure that'll also be terrific. Hope everyone can get out to see that. I'd like to give a thank you out to our special education PTO, who for the last 2 days and then also tomorrow have been hosting Differences Day in our 3 elementary schools. It's a really super day for our second graders and our fifth graders to learn quite a bit about the experiences that other children have. And we really appreciate all the support from the parents who volunteer, as well as from the high school students who travel down to the elementary schools to help out with that event. I said that I would share just a few words tonight on the next steps in the process regarding selection of a new mascot. We're excited to move into that phase now of the process. We'll be putting together a stakeholder committee that will be very much inclusive of students as well as staff and administration and parents. That group likely will hold, we think, an open meeting for those who want to give input on criteria for a new mascot as well as process. That steering committee then will most likely develop and publish criteria, and then we'll invite from the broader community suggestions for new mascots. They'll give lots of consideration. They'll be involved in the narrowing down, and then certainly there'll be significant input again we hope from our student community as well as from others as we get further along. Our hope, and maybe this is optimistic, maybe not, but our goal for initially will be by the end of April, we hope to have selected a new mascot. We want to give it enough time, but we also want to leave ourselves enough time to be able to do ordering and planning and preparations for what we hope is a really great start to the coming school year. And that same committee will also be giving consideration to respectful retirement of the current mascot and process for that down the road. So that's that on next steps. And then finally, next week is Thanksgiving. So we have 3 days of school, and then we want to wish everybody a very happy Thanksgiving break. We won't see you again before then, so a peaceful and restful Thanksgiving to all.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Sure.
I think if there are no further announcements or comments, then we're ready to turn our attention to tonight's presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marjorie. So this evening, we've prepared a presentation on student achievement, and we'll certainly be talking a lot about some standardized measures, test scores, and things like that. But there are also other measures of student achievement that we'd like to think about as we go through. So hopefully we've prepared a full picture for you. And there'll also be some updates to the RTI plan, which you mentioned earlier. So just some of the things that we think about when we think about achievement. So, first of all, wellness and sense of self. So we've been talking a lot this school year about social emotional wellness, knowing our students really well. That's really important. So that's in the backdrop, even when we think about assessments. We want to choose assessments that help us to know our students as learners, know their interests, know their motivations, because it helps in terms of all of our instruction. We think, of course, about academic skills as well, some of the foundational knowledge. So when we think about our early learners, we think about things like phonics and early numeracy, some of the things that are really the basis for everything else that they'll do as they move forward. Of course, motivation, interest and passion, and curiosity. So, and all of that, of course, is connected to our learning commitment. So when we think about the learning commitment, we think about intellectual engagement, relevance, and an active learning environment. So as Bill mentioned, when we walked through the high school this week, we also saw lots of group work, students talking to one another. So it's a different kind of education, and we're really thinking as we plan lessons about student engagement. Sorry, this is going a little more quickly than it should. Here we go. So then thinking about how we use student assessment data. The goal is always to improve instruction and improve learning. So you'll see different reports ranging from individual student reports for parents to district-wide reports for the Board of Education. They're all a part of our practice. And then some of the questions that teachers and administrators ask about these assessments. What do students understand, whether partially or fully? That helps to inform us. What do they need help with? What curricular topics need attention? So sometimes when we look at patterns in assessments, we'll notice that there are specific topics that we need to teach into more deeply and need more attention, sometimes for small groups, sometimes for whole grades. Teaching strategies that may be working well or not working as well, and then kinds of professional development that might be offered. And then some of the actions that we take, we try to use that data, and we also think about multiple measures. So we're not looking at just state standardized tests. We look at classroom assessments, curriculum-based assessments, all kinds of different bits of evidence. So even student behaviors, teacher anecdotal records, and those things help us to inform our instruction. So we study those, we put supports in place, and that's related to our RTI plan that we'll talk about a little in a few minutes. For individual students, we determine those areas that need some extra attention and support, consider research-based best practices, discuss the goals with other administrators, instructional leaders, and teachers, of course, as well as parents, and then explore resources and professional development. So we'll start with a little bit about the RTI plan. And I think it really fits nicely here. We were initially thinking about doing a separate presentation on this, but when we think about some of the state assessment data, for example, and we think about students who are not meeting those benchmarks, this describes what we do for those students. So it's actually a nice fit in this same conversation. So we use those formal and informal assessments to determine the need and the type of response to intervention that we provide. So we are working on, and have had, and we're working on even more clear benchmarks for each grade, multiple measures that are considered, and these tiers of service that provide support based on the needs of each student. So we have 3 tiers of RTI support. Tier 1 is the kind of support that happens within the general education classroom, so where students are provided with more intensive instruction from their classroom teacher, so maybe more small group or individual conferences, but the teachers know that these are students that need a little more intensive support. Tier 2, they might receive that support in addition to Tier 1 from an interventionist perhaps, or some other support provider who would either come into their classroom or pull them out of their classroom. Sometimes that's a scheduling decision, sometimes that's a needs-alike grouping decision. If we have a needs-alike group within the classroom, sometimes an interventionist will push in. Sometimes it's hard to form that needs-alike group, so it's easier to pull them out. At our elementary, we have our win period, so that those kinds of groups can be seen without missing something in their classrooms.
Want to just define WIN for those who might not
I'm
know?
sorry, what I need. So that's a period where there's no new instruction, and students who get pull-out support can be pulled out without missing anything new, and students who are still in the classroom get additional small group instruction from their teacher in a variety of topics. I'm just trying to keep up on my computer here so I can see everything. We did have an RTI committee this year, or last year rather, that was formed in November of 2018. So that was a new committee. There had been RTI committees in the past, but this was just a renewed version of that. And within that committee, we had 3 subcommittees, one to look closely at literacy, another for math, and another for behaviors. And those are all parts of our RTI plan. We met throughout the year, both in whole group and small group settings, to review practices and gather feedback, talk to colleagues, and update the plan that you have in front of you this evening. Some of the goals around the plan were simplifying the RTI process, using assessments that really inform instruction, both in the general ed classroom as well as in the intervention setting, to start to study interventions closely and think about, are we matching our interventions to student need, and having greater coherence between the intervention and the classroom setting. So when you think about some of the changes that have been made in the district, for example, writing workshop, reading workshop, we want our interventions to be a match to the classroom setting. So it's not exactly the same thing. You may intensify the support, but we want the same kind of vocabulary for students. We don't want it to seem like something very, very different, and then students have difficulty transferring those skills. So we want to promote the ability to transfer. So we worked over the summer, reconvened this October, and we're continuing to gather feedback and study, and we would plan for this to be a 1-year plan and to come back to you a year from now or sooner with a revision for next school year. So some of the things that we updated for this year, just kind of a summary of some of the changes. They're not major, and yet they, some of the things that we've tweaked for this year. So AimsWeb Plus was something that we use as a universal screening tool that all students receive in kindergarten through 8th grade. So we're continuing to use that as a screener for literacy and for math, but we're using it just a little bit differently, and there's been differences over the years in how it's used. So we're using the composite scores. So instead of looking at individual subtests, we're looking at the impact on overall reading or overall mathematics. In some cases, that actually decreased the number of subtests that we had to give in order to get that composite score, although we will sometimes give those additional subtests to students where we need more information. So it's the universal screener kind of gives you that broad stroke so we know who to take a closer look at, and then we decide the tools to use that for. We also wanted to clarify that we're using national norms instead of local norms, because we think that gives us a bigger picture view of students' achievement. We can always look at local norms in addition to that. So we also started this year at our elementary schools using the Teachers College Independent Reading Inventory. We had been using DRA, which is a very similar tool. The Teachers College inventory was chosen. It's a little more user-friendly in terms of teacher classroom use. It also more specifically identifies an independent reading level. So in the past with DRA, you might have a level 50, which was a 5th grade level, but this would say a level like R, S, T, or U. So it's more specific in terms of a teacher being able to guide students toward the Just Right books in their classroom library. And we did lots of training this past summer, also in the fall, to make sure that every general education classroom teacher was trained, as well as some of our E&L teachers, special education, and interventionists as well. We also revised the menu of additional assessments that we might use, so that's been expanded. We didn't really take much away, but they have more choice in assessments that will help to determine the focus of instruction and the appropriateness of the intervention. They also serve as progress monitoring tools. So as we give an intervention, we're constantly monitoring the progress to make sure that it's going in the right direction, or helping us decide whether or not we need to change course. And as I mentioned, professional learning, we trained lots and lots of teachers in the Teachers College Independent Reading Assessment. We had an institute this past summer, which we called Knowing Our Readers, but the focus was on the components of literacy instruction. So that has a real impact on everything in this plan. Highlighted opportunities for small group work and differentiation. So that's relevant for Tier 1 as well as some of the other tiers. And we're going to focus more on training in interventions as we move forward. So just to give you an example of what this might look like at an elementary level. So a student perhaps receives a score of 2 on the New York State ELA exam in grade 4. The Ames Web Plus, which is given to every student, provides standardized norm-referenced information on reading achievement. So we have that recent information, we have historical information as well. And then the student would also receive this TC Independent Reading Assessment, which helps to identify the level, as well as information on accuracy, fluency, and comprehension. So all students get those things. Then in addition, this student might get an additional DRA to give additional information given by the interventionist on perhaps the written response to what he or she is reading. So that might help us to understand why this student received a lower score on the ELA. And then the RTI team, and they would also look at the New York State assessment more closely and see what they could analyze to see, was it the written responses, the multiple choice, the constructed responses. And when the team meets, they're reviewing all of this information and trying to identify the best type of intervention that's most closely suited to the student's needs. Another example would be secondary math. So let's say a student who's in 7th grade receives a score of 2 on the New York State Math Assessment. And again, they're receiving Ames Web Plus. So we're getting that norm reference standardized information as well. And then there are math assessments that are given. The Big Ideas Math is given at grade 7. That's the name of the program that we use there. And they have math placement exams from the prior year. So that all helps us to see where the student is falling in terms of curriculum-based measures and how they relate to their peers. We also look closely at classwork and teacher observations from the current year to kind of round out the picture. And once again, the team meets and reviews all of this and decides on the most appropriate placement. So there's lots of universal screeners that we use and information that we have on all students. And then the students that we have some questions about or we might be worried about have some additional measures. So we're trying to really round out the picture and get some classroom-based measures, some standardized measures, some norm reference measures, and really think about what makes the most sense to round out the picture rather than relying on any one assessment. So before we move on to the report card, should we stop
and just to talk about the RTI plan for a moment. Are there questions about the plan? Sure.
Mary, thank you. Very comprehensive presentation. Thank you. I just have one question. Do we have a way of measuring how successful we are in helping our students return to sort of to achieve the expected level of assessment? In other words, when somebody enters RTI, how long does it take us to get them back out? Do we have sort of broad statistics around that, and how efficient we are and how good our RTI program is?
We don't really have evaluation of our RTI program in that way. What we're finding is it really varies so much by student. So some of it is preventative in nature, and I know that's the spirit of the RTI movement, right? It's to really reduce the number of referrals to special education, and then also to move them quickly through rounds or cycles of intervention. So that's why we do this progress monitoring to see, is it working? So what we're finding is there are students who are receiving 2 types of intervention in some cases. They may be receiving literacy intervention and math intervention. So what might be reduced in one area might pop up in another area. So it gets really complicated to say we've reduced, in whole, or we've reduced the number of referrals to special education. But I'd say it's a much more informed process. We have lots of information now going into our CSE meetings. It's also complicated by some of what New York State is working on, right? So we've heard, and there has been some word from the state that they're moving towards, it's called MTSS for next year, multi-tiered support services, which isn't incredibly different from the RTI. There's still tiers of support. But one of the things that they're focused on, which really resonates with us for the learning commitment and many reasons, is universal design for learning. So it's more differentiation of the general education setting so that more students could be serviced there. So it sounds like maybe some semantics, but it really is important. For example, if an interventionist or a special education teacher is pushing into a classroom, if the teacher is teaching in a very traditional way to the whole class, just one way, it's really difficult to provide an intervention that makes a difference. But if there is some assumed differentiation in the classroom, for example, in a workshop model, like a reading or writing workshop, where there's a short burst of whole class instruction, and then everybody is working independently while the teacher pulls lots of small groups, you could easily have an interventionist or a special education teacher, an ENL teacher, taking small groups or individuals as well. So in that model, everyone gets more attention and more small group monitoring and instruction. So I know that's not a very direct answer to your question.
but
It's just a
very
very
helpful, yeah.
complicated thing to measure.
I would have
And
thought that New York State would monitor each district and sort of have some comparisons between districts as to how their RTI, I'm essentially trying to determine, are we successful? Is our RTI program successful? Is it more or less successful than our peers?
So one of the purposes of the early RTI also, though, was that students would be college and career ready, as crazy as that sounds, right? So years ago, we didn't have that much in terms of intervention in the early grades. So you don't want to wait until kids are in high school and then say, oh, they're really not doing very well, and now here you're on this short timeline. So one thing we do know is we have just a handful of students who are still getting RTI in the high school. So it seems that, maybe anecdotally, this is helping students to be more prepared. I don't know for sure, but the
That's
goal
helpful,
was,
Alice.
right, to
That's
have
Yeah.
students
helpful,
meeting
yeah.
those long-term
That's the true measure.
goals.
I
And-
like
yeah,
that,
Right.
the numbers at middle
very
and
good
high
measure.
are very, very small.
That's helpful.
I
Thank
was
you.
going to ask, so it sounds like it's a triangle getting
Yeah.
smaller. In rough terms, in the elementary grades, because most of our scores and stuff are very, very good. So is it a relatively small population that's in this?
It's
Is
relatively
under RTI?
small. I'd say somewhere around 15 to 18%. It really depends on the grade. And sometimes at different times in the year, because we monitor it closely, there's more happening usually in the beginning of the year, right? So
Yeah.
in the beginning of first grade, we usually see a very large group, and then by mid-year, that group is reduced, and that's happens historically over time here, and I'd say in other places, that's not uncommon either. So it changes depending on the time of year you're looking at it. But overall, certainly less than 20%, and much lower in lots of grades.
In the RTI plan itself, and I think because you mentioned something about timeline a minute ago, it brought it to mind. I think it said after 2 cycles of 6 to 8 weeks, that would be the next juncture to sort of revisit, should we be doing something differently for a student who's
Yes.
receiving Tier 3 instruction? Is that pretty standard from one school district to the next with regard to how long you would wait?
It is, and there are different schools of thought on that. You know, with some interventions, the premise might be 20 weeks, that you'd really stick with something long-term. So you kind of see the positives and negatives to both. And on the one hand, you don't want to stick with something that's not working, and so you do want to monitor closely. On the other hand, you don't want to keep changing interventions, so you don't want to confuse the student. So I think it's really about the monitoring closely. And, you know, our theme this year of getting to know our students well really resonates because we really have to look at the whole picture. But it is very typical that you would see those 6 to 8 week cycles, at least to review and have another RTI meeting so that the team can look at the data. The team also consists of, at the very least, an administrator. There's usually a special education teacher, an interventionist, the classroom teacher who's referring, sometimes other teachers, an ENL teacher if that's appropriate. So you get different perspectives on the data, which I think is very helpful. Sometimes to have outside eyes, teachers who don't work with the child, taking a look at some of the data and evidence.
Thank you. The only other question I had, I really appreciate these charts and the 2 examples. That was very helpful. I'm still uncertain as to whether if a student receives a 2 on a state assessment, are we required to then deliver some RTI instruction, or are you suggesting that these other measures can actually provide latitude to the RTI team to make a recommendation that despite a 2 on a state assessment, that student is not eligible or would not benefit from
We don't
RTI?
provide, it doesn't have to be a direct form of service, but we do provide, at the very least, we monitor that student closely. So sometimes we see instances where we find the student didn't finish the test. And everyone says, you know, we know this student is a strong student, they've always gotten good grades, this is silly. You know, we wouldn't provide a direct form of instruction. And in other cases, we know it's absolutely a sign that we need to do more. So it's not a have to in terms of direct service, but it is a have to in terms of continuing to take a look to make sure that we made the right decision.
And that's actually changed, Marjorie. So you're remembering a time where if a student got a 1 or a 2, we had to have
Yes.
students in RTI.
Yes.
And now we are allowed to look at multiple measures and use other ways to monitor.
Yeah.
Okay,
So-
that's helpful. I really appreciate that. And then the last question just on these is, you know, how often, if you can just generalize, is there a lot of noise between these measures? You know, how often is there one measure that stands out as students just consistently not performing well, let's say on Ames Web? Everything else looks okay. And as compared to, is it most often the case that all of the signals are kind of coming in at about the same bandwidth?
I don't know that I could generalize. I heard, for example, this year in first grade, a lot of students did, you know, we were identifying lots of students in first grade at the beginning of the year on Ames Web. And then we took a closer look. And some of them, you know, the group became smaller as we gave the TC independent reading inventory. So, but there's certainly a subgroup, and that's a group that we want to really look closely at. And other grades, it seemed a little more consistent, I'd say, as you go up in the grades. But there are always things that we question. You know, for example, in the upper grades, they take Ames Web on the computer. You know, so you want to think about engagement and are the students really engaged in the assessment the whole time? So those kinds of things, we just always have to question it.
Sure.
But I'm not sure I could say generally there's there's a consistent theme with any one assessment.
I understand. It's helpful just even to hear a characterization of the conversation that would ensue. I appreciate it. It was really insightful, very eye-opening for us. Really appreciate the comprehensiveness. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions or comments before we move on?
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Sure. So we'll move on to, oh, there we go again, sorry. State reports. And just to, sorry, this is going the wrong way. Look at those performance levels again. Again, this is around the Common Core Learning Standards, now called the Next Generation Learning Standards. But a level 1, the student is below proficient. Level 2, they're calling partially proficient, which is kind of interesting language because as we report these scores, we look at levels 3 and 4 as being proficient. So level 2 is kind of this middle of the road where they may have some proficiencies but not full proficiency. And then level 3 being proficient and 4 excelling in those standards. And the year-to-year comparisons, as we look at this, the State Ed Department warns us against making those year-to-year comparisons due to changes in tests, testing parameters and cut scores, but looking at trends in the bigger pictures. So, and last year we had this notice from NYSED about last year's 3 to 8 data, and what it was really saying was that we need to be careful that we could, this school year, so what we'll look at tonight, we can compare this year's to the prior years. So they're kind of saying different things about the same test, but it's most closely aligned because they're both 2-day tests and they're both untimed. So we can take a look at those as well. So just to keep in mind as we look at the data. So the first set of data that we'll look at is the math data from the 3rd through 8th grade New York State assessments. So this is percentage of students receiving a score of 3 or 4. The purple, of course, is our district, and the other side is New York State. So looking at our scores, they are all firmly above New York State's percentage of students receiving a 3 or 4. You see some slight variations, whether you look across the grade from left to right, or whether you look diagonally and try to look at a cohort. There's a little bit of up and down, but between 3 to 8 percentage points, it's not very significant. And also given the statement from New York State, those don't seem particularly significant, but we always do look at students as a group, and then again in comparison to state averages as well. The next slide is the New York State ELA in the same way. You'll see some up and down, all above New York State. The range is a little bit more there when you think about the cohorts, but again, nothing very, very significant. These are rankings that we have, so this gives you a picture of what you might see in New York State, where we rank also in Westchester County, looking at Putnam, Northern Westchester, which is about 18 districts, and then our comparable districts. So Scarsdale, I'm blanking for a minute, Somers, Chappaqua, Byram Hills, and Harrison, yes.
In that order.
Yes, something like that, yeah. So you can see, it's interesting if you look all the way back to 2015, it looked like our ranking was much lower. So it's certainly gone up. It dropped a little bit from the prior year this year. But it's such a small group. If one district moves up, then one moves down. So again, it's not a very significant difference from last year. And then, sorry about this, our refusal or opt-out data has dropped just a little bit this year in ELA and in math as well, 13% for ELA and 15.1% for math. And we'll move on to our high school data. So our graduation rate remains at 99%, which is very strong. And then we look at our Regents exam scores, which are also, they remain very consistent over years. If you look at the 3 years on the screen, there's very little change in most of those exams. They go up or down 1 point, 2 points, possibly 3 points in some cases, but there's not significant change. You'll also notice the global history and geography, that's a transition exam. So that will be given this year as well. And then we will move on. That's because of a change in the social studies framework and what's tested on global history. And then we have our Regents exam rankings. So again, you can see with our comparable districts, some variation there. Those are all the Regents exams that we give. Next, we'll take a look at, well, first our National Merit Scholarship finalists. There were 6 last year, so we wanted to kind of intersperse some of our pictures of our students and some other pieces. So this is a nice piece. So our valedictorian and salutatorian are in that group as well. And then looking at advanced placements exams from last year, we had 404 students take over 885 AP exams. More than 99% of students in courses took the exam, and 71% earned a 3 or better, 45% earned a 4 or better, and 19% earned a 5. We also had many AP scholars, scholars with honors and distinctions, and 15 national scholars. So taking a close look at some of our AP examinations, you'll see in most of our exams, we were above the national average. Our scores from year to year remain fairly consistent, but those are the numbers of students who have 3s, 4s, and 5s, and then the percentage of papers at 3 or higher for our district and then nationally. And this is a continued list on the next slide. We have lots and lots of AP exams that are given. Statistics was not offered, although it was listed there. So we'll stop. Are there any questions on our high school data, test data, before we move forward?
I have questions and comments, but maybe at the end.
I'm going to leave them toward the end.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so we'll move on to extracurricular participation at the secondary level. One thing that I thought was interesting that I came across, it was a study, it's an initiative by the School Superintendents Association to introduce more research-based metrics to appropriately assess that students are college, career ready, and they say also life ready. But some of the takeaways from that work, the value and importance of community service in building leadership and increasing the likelihood of college graduation, and also the importance of workplace learning experience in creating smoother transitions to college and to the workplace. So I think as we look at some of the data, especially some of our survey data, it might be interesting to think about that as well. So this was our survey of middle school extracurricular activity. This is self-reported participation, and you can see the breakdown across 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. So thinking about that community service and volunteer work, it's so nice to see that more than half of our 8th graders are participating in community service and volunteer work, but even a significant number of 6th and 7th graders as well. So, but our athletics certainly are place where there's lots of participation between our formal school athletics and other recreational sports and activities. The performing arts, of course, are very important to us. Those are a big part of what students participate in, student government, and some smaller numbers in newspapers and publications. Those are some smaller groups, but then clubs and intramurals, which encompass many, many groups. Then at the high school level, we had a similar survey, so you can see that breakdown by grade as well. Athletics, of course, lots of participation across the grades. And that community service and volunteer work, again, 67% by 12th grade, which is really interesting to see. So lots of experiences both connected to our school and outside of school as well. And our sports participation, so New York State Public High School Athletic Association gave us 22 Scholar Athlete Team Awards. So that requires a GPA of 90 or higher for 75% of the team. It's really impressive that 22 of our teams received that award. And then last year was the inaugural season of our unified basketball team, which was really a highlight for us in terms of seeing some of the friendships and relationships and sportsmanship that we saw, and really wonderful to see. So now we'll take a look at the senior survey. So each year, our seniors are given a survey to help us understand how their experience was here in Katona-Lewisboro. The participation on that survey is up from last year, certainly. It's a little lower than it was the prior year, but a very high percentage of our students participating in that survey. So the first question there, during the last 2 years of high school, about how many hours did you spend in a typical 7-day week doing each of the following? So it's volunteering, working for pay, preparing for class or homework, participating in activities inside and outside of school, and then relaxing and socializing. So you see the variation in numbers there. Certainly interesting, again, going back to the volunteering, 19% of students spent 6 to 10 hours in doing some volunteer work, but 69% spent between 0 and 5. So sometime, although they certainly have lots on their plate, and we know about that. Of course, the homework, takes a significant piece of their time as well. But we like to see that they're also spending some time relaxing and socializing. This is a little difficult to read on the screen. The question is, during your high school years, how involved were you in the following activities at John Jay High School and not outside of school? So it's a little more specific. So you see this information presented from 2016 through 2019. And you'll see that our students are involved in many, many things. The next question asked them to rate the quality of their instruction, or we added level of intellectual engagement. That's something we're talking about a lot more with our learning commitment at John Jay High School in the following areas. So we named all the core content areas, as well as computers and technology, business, performing and fine arts, health and physical education, and world languages. So the students were able to rate the way they felt their instruction was, either good to very good. That's what the percentage of students who are rating it that way is what's presented on the screen. All right. The next slide is percentage of students who agree or strongly agree with the following statements. So things like, my classes give me useful preparation for what I plan to do in life. We have 55% of our students last year feeling that that was the case. What they learn in class is necessary for the future, 60%. But you see our highest numbers, high school teaches me valuable skills, 81% of students last year. Working hard in high school matters for success in the future. And one of the happiest statistics, I'm getting a good education at KLSD. So 97% of students felt that way. So that was a highlight for us to see. And then the percent of students who said, most teachers I had for class at John Jay High School. make school interesting for me. That was 63%. Some of the higher numbers there, really care about me at 82%. Always try to be fair, 80%. Listen to students' ideas at 85. Explain things in a way I can understand, 86. Set high expectations for me at 88. Tell me how I do on classwork, tests, and homework assignments, 92. They know who I am, so very much connected to our goals, 91%, and treat me with respect at 94%. And then how satisfied are you with your high school experience? So satisfied or somewhat satisfied in 2018 and 19. The way the question was written was changed slightly. So we have about 88% of our students feeling very satisfied or somewhat satisfied last year. So although I'm highlighting some of the things that seem very strong, just know that we also pay attention to and worry about those students. There are 12% of students who did not feel that way. So that's something that we need to think about. And as we say, we need to know our students well and get to know all our students. We need to find out why that is. So sometimes, we might think about adding to surveys like this and think about questions that can add a little more detail and depth because we're not really sure why that's the case. The next slide lists all of the senior internships. So again, thinking about that research that says workplace experience is so helpful with the transition to college and career and just to life, to the work world. So this is really important, and you'll see that our participation is very strong in this way. And I think it was over 90% of our students that participated in total when I looked at the total numbers of students. 97% of the class. So that's very impressive. And just to highlight some of our STREAM work, so again, STREAM standing for Science, Technology, Research, Engineering, the Arts, and Mathematics. So these are just a few of the showcases and competitions that our students participated in last year. The Bedford 2020 Greenlight Competition, Steve Zoller's class has participated in that for the last few years, and that's really around sustainability projects. So the students are using what they know to create things or sustainable projects, and then they hope to win some funding from Bedford 2020 for their work. But you'll also see things like our high school, or elementary rather, and middle school science fairs, the first Lego League robotics competitions. We have Math Counts, the Regeneron Science Talent Search, the Science Olympiad, West Putt Science and Engineering Fair, and then the Westchester Rockland Science and Humanities Research Symposium. So all of our students had some very impressive results at those competitions, and just participating in them is really something that enhances their experience tremendously. Of course, our performing arts are always very important to us, and they, again, enhance the student experience. We had our freshman play last year, A Tiny Miracle with a fiber optic unicorn. I remember attending that and wondering what it would be like, but it was very entertaining. The fall drama was Harvey, the spring musical Guys and Dolls. We had our one-act play festival. Middle school had the Twilight Zone and Anything Goes last year. So there was also a Poetry Out Loud competition. So there are many opportunities to participate in the performing arts, and those are things our students really enjoy. In terms of music, performing arts, the Berkeley High School Jazz Festival, of course, that was a big win for our students last year. They placed first there. We also had the Winter Conference for NYSSMA, the Electronic Music Competitions Showcase, where one of our students was a winner there. We had Music on the Lawn at J-Fest last fall. So that was something different where lots of students got to participate and perform. So that was really nice to see. And then our winter and spring concerts, of course, band, orchestra, vocal, and even electronic music was included. We have our visual arts. You see a student there at one of our art shows at the high school. You also see some pictures of some of our fourth graders who were visiting Katona Museum of the Arts, and some pictures from our arts classrooms. So lastly, we'll move on to the graduate survey results. So students are sent these surveys after their freshman year in college. So now looking back on their first year of college experience, they're asked some questions to think about how well John Jay High School and the Katona-Lewisboro School District prepared them for college. So this question says, during your first year of college, how challenging were the following? Some of the choices are learning course material, managing time, getting help with schoolwork, making new friends, and managing stress. So very challenging. We see bigger numbers of managing stress, which I think is something we hear about nationally. So unfortunately, that's not a surprise. Getting help with schoolwork was not very challenging for most of our students. But some of those things, it's helpful for us to think about how we can prepare them in many ways for the college experience. The next question, how prepared were you to do the following in your academic work at college? So writing clearly and effectively, speaking clearly and effectively, thinking critically and analytically, analyzing statistical and numerical information, working effectively with others, using computing and information technology, and learning effectively on your own. So it seems like our students felt very prepared, especially in working effectively with others, which makes sense since we've been focusing on collaboration. It's always good to see things like writing clearly and effectively, and things like using computing and information technology. We want to think more about that and how we might improve our efforts. The next slide says, my high school did a good or excellent job at, and you can read some of the things there. Some of the highlights: encouraging me to be an independent thinker was very high, 55%. Ensuring I had the writing skills I needed after high school at 59%. And helping me to understand the college application and admission process at 72%. So again, this is where we'd like to dig a little deeper for some more information, because it sounds in some ways like writing was a strength, but then one of the lower numbers was teaching me to write college-level research papers. So we just need more information in some cases, so we'll be asking students to provide us with a little more detail. And then finally, our last slide, how satisfied are you with your high school experience? So we have 71% of our students very satisfied or somewhat satisfied. And then we also have 16% who were somewhat or very dissatisfied. And then we have a group of other, and that's where we needed to dig a little more deeply to find out what that other opinion was.
This was great. Thank you. What a comprehensive overview of so much that's happening across the district. I know we refer to it as the student achievement presentation, but you've really given us more than just a snapshot of achievement tonight. So there's really a lot to think about, and I'm sure we'll have some comments and questions, but just at the highest level, just so many indicators of a really healthy organization where students are thriving and learning. And for 97% of the students in the graduating class of 2019, where we had such a high percentage of students responding to the survey to say, I got a good education at Katona-Lewisboro. I think that's great. Yeah. Really terrific. And it will be interesting actually to see the graduate survey results from 2019. I noticed we had relatively low, 91 students is not a whole lot of, it's hard to dig into 91 responses to a survey, but when you compare the responses from the graduate class, from the 2018 to 2019, there's a lot more positivity coming out of the class of 2019. So it will be interesting, actually, to compare the graduate survey results.
Yes.
Aiden, part of your job is to get your classmates to respond to the
Yes.
survey
Yeah.
next
Maybe
year.
you
So
can help us
get
out
all
with
their
that.
emails, friend them on social media. I don't know how you're going to do it, but it's part of your job.
I'll get it
It's
done.
important.
Yeah, we count on you.
No pressure, Aiden.
So thank you. I welcome comments, questions. Terrence, please.
So I agree. This is a great presentation. Thank you. I think it gives a lot of kind of depth and clarity to many of the things that we might take for granted about how much is actually going on. So, kudos to you and the whole faculty and everyone doing the work they're doing. I do have a question about the internship slide.
Yes.
And I'll tell you where I'm kind of coming from with this question, which is, at the next level in higher education, we find a lot of students have a hard time connecting their majors to the real world. So they're social science or humanities majors, which is still the majority of majors, even though, let's say, computer science or digital has like all the very kind of attractive headlines. Majority of the majors are still psychology or political science or economics and what have you. And we find that they don't really understand how to take their academic work and plug that into career or professional opportunities. So when I look at this list of organizations, there's quite a range here. It's everything from IBM to our local fitness center. And so my question is, and we have teachers who are essentially tasked with and compensated for also serving as career counselors in this initiative. Is that accurate? How does that work?
There are 2 staff members who get a stipend for
Right.
helping students to get their proposals and doing some of the work, but I wouldn't say they're career counselors at this stage.
Right. So I guess and all cards on the table, and I'm not bitter about it or anything, but I work at a local campus for a university, and I filled out the form and I said, I'd love to have one of our interns here, and kind of put together a description. No one chose me. Again, I'm not bitter, but that said, it was kind of a real job, right?
Yeah.
Because I want people to come and I want them to kind of engage with certain experiences that can go on their resume. So I look at this, and to be very blunt, I kind of would like to know what they're doing at Apex Fitness. Is that going to really fit on their resume? I want to know what's going on at Farmer and the Fish. Delicious, but is that a real internship, experiential learning, work experience that's going to help them at the next level?
I would encourage you, Terrence, sorry to interrupt you, but to attend the fair at the end of the
Yeah.
year, because I think really the answer to the questions you're seeking will just be, it'll be so heartening and resounding. The students are so meaningfully engaged in all of their internships and the requirements, sorry to be answering the question, but the requirements that they have to participate in this program, the journal log, the final presentation or poster board, or it's really always on their laptops now that they do. In my experience and observation, and I really do try to go every year to that internship fair, it's incredible what these students are doing. And I think we really can't bring assumptions to any of these places of employment, because we have students who are interested in service industries. We have students who are interested in design and marketing who could be doing any number of things at any one of these organizations. So I just put in a
Sure.
big plug to,
And my
to hear
question,
from the
my
students on
question is
that.
actually to your point, which is, if they're doing the design marketing for collateral related to promoting a local business, that is wonderful, right? And I would just I want to understand how we're connecting the dot between experiential learning and career prep with the academics, with the opportunities, who's vetting that so that there is a level of quality control. And so it sounds like as if there is, I would just like to understand the mechanisms that go into that entire process. If anyone can speak to
Yeah,
it,
I
or
mean,
we can take it
For
offline.
some of it, too, though, it's some students' first work experience. So some of it is just about getting an application and interacting with the public in a different way. And then some of our students may be 17 or 18. Transportation, honestly, does become an issue
course.
also, in that we need to have sometimes some opportunities that are close by.
Right.
But we could think about, there might be some way too for Andrew to provide you some earlier information about, I know we've collected information on the internships over years, that you could do some reading and looking at what's been done before you get to see this year's students.
Right.
And we have had some students come back some years in college also and show some things that they had done that then did lead through their major and other projects and things that they did. But the goals are different for each student, so I think that's part of what they're setting forth. So for some students, just creating more of a public presence, interacting with adults in a different way might be the goal for that
Right,
student,
right.
more than being connected to there. And then some kids are, taking the train to the city and they're doing
Yeah.
the science research for something. So there's a wide range
Sure.
depending on the goal
Yeah,
the student has set.
and that's helpful to me, understanding that there is that wide range that
Yeah.
is more kind of shaped toward what a particular student or group of students might be looking for in terms of outcomes. It might be a big deal, just like you said, I'm going to go in by myself, fill out the application,
Right.
talk to the manager, learn how to look somebody in the eye and shake a hand and say
Right.
thank you. And that right there is growth, and I completely appreciate
Right.
that. But the list itself, I think, is where I ask some questions about
Sure.
balance and outcomes.
Yeah, and it's kind of the challenge too as a program grows. So we're seeing more
Right.
participation.
Right.
But, it becomes harder. But at the same time, I think the structures are in place, as Marjorie mentioned, like the students' reflection, their proposal for doing, they have to really think about why they're choosing the internship that they are. And they have to do some work in finding a place that will support them in
Right.
their internship.
Yep.
So even that is a part of the process. That's a good part of the learning.
Right.
So I've only obviously had the experience of once seeing the internship fair, and it was very impressive in terms of the students' learning and experience, but something we'll look closely at, sure.
Did you say 97% of students are
I was
participating?
shocked by
Yes.
that.
I thought
Yeah.
maybe I misheard you. That is
No.
incredible.
It's been a huge growth
That's
in the
just
program when you look at the
incredible. And that
slides.
just speaks so highly, I think, to the quality of the experiences that students are having, and the word gets out, and more students come to understand that this is so much better a use of their time than what they might otherwise have been doing in past years after certain exams are over. And there's just that, I can't remember what the term was that I remember hearing about when we first launched.
Senioritis.
It wasn't senioritis. No, it was
Senioritis.
something that like connoted kind of just checking out, not unlike, I don't remember, but this just
Second
seems like
semester
such a
senior?
great way
something
to
like that.
counteract that and keep students productive and engaged and with like one foot here, but one foot out the door. So that's great. We should really be congratulated and congratulate the guidance department and the staff members who've worked with this program over time to grow it. I just am astounded that 97% of our students have that opportunity. I think that's really great.
Yeah, I was a little astounded by that myself, so I had to look up. The prior year was 86%, which was also very
Wow,
high,
but still
but shows
that's
a
good
lot of growth
growth.
even
It
in that
really
last
does.
year.
It's grown very quickly.
That's incredible. And that's kind of resource intensive to run this program too.
yeah.
And thank you to our community members. Thank you, Terrence. Thank you to any community members who volunteer.
We'll just get you the transportation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
Get it
it's
to
great,
Stanford.
and it's a really nice snapshot and just sort of like reflection on our community too, because actually certain career industries are not reflected, and that is a little bit of a function of where we are maybe in northern Westchester as compared to folks in southern Westchester, although I understand some of our students commute to the city, but it's great, really terrific. Other comments, questions on other slides? Yes, Bill?
So you'll indulge me a little bit if I wax poetic, because this is, I think I'm certainly the last board member standing from the Performance Metrics Committee. Alice still
That's where
bears,
we met, Bill.
Alice still bears the scars from that. I am, just so the other board members know and the public know, the way we are handling the data and examining it is much more detailed and useful than most districts do. This is not a pro forma exercise. I understand that. So I think that other industries can probably learn from this ability to actually look at what you're doing critically and sort of look at the numbers, and absolutely agree that what makes this so special is not just test scores. It's participation in this, that, and the other. I remember on previous boards, there were questions, are the middle school students participating in things? And yeah, they are. And, the surveys, I'm not sure if it's unique. I don't think too many districts bother to survey their seniors and graduates and get information. Just the way we collect it, I just would encourage us to continue to do this. That this is not easy, it's difficult. I'm going to go over some of the results because I just think they're so fantastic they bear calling out. But even, it's almost like the exceptions that prove the rule, even during your presentation, you were saying, and we have to look into this, and that's the point. That's the whole point of this. Sort of like the RTI for the students, there's an RTI for the district. And if there are little areas to shine some more light on, all the better to find them out. In terms of the standardized testing, again, we sort of came up with this comparison thing to the state, to the county. And just to put it in perspective, we're in the top 10%, probably closer to the top 5% in the state consistently. Certainly the top 10% of most of our comparisons, and that holds for the regions as well. I mean, just the fact that we're doing this, and then the advanced placement, I think it bears emphasis that you said, I think it was 99% of the students in the AP course take the test. That is not how most districts do it, or at least some other districts do it, where there's sort of this, if the student wants to take the test, if they feel prepared for the test, et cetera, you can see how that would screen things out, and they might have a higher percentage of 4s and 5s, but they've sort of already screened things out that way. The sheer number of AP tests that we offer, it looks like, somebody, on average, they took 2 in their career here. And, even the use of the data to focus on areas that are different, because we are better than the national average in almost every single examination in the AP. And this is, I think for a lot of things, we want to be well above the national average. I think for AP performance, the national average is a reasonable benchmark to at least look at, and we're significantly above it in almost every category, and we have such high participation. And then the surveys, I always complain about the return rate. The 221 seniors is very good.
Yes.
I mean, for most surveys, I don't know what percentage that is, but it's well above a percentage that would give you data that's usable. And then, I'm trying to think, maybe I wasn't a very good high school student, or my high school wasn't very good, but the idea that you have such wide participation in things, sort of my impression that there's something for everyone. You can see it here, that there's something for everyone here. And then some of the numbers are just incredible to me. So you ask seniors, and you got 88% of seniors with a good return rate to say they're satisfied or very satisfied with their high school experience. I think my high school and lots of high schools would be afraid to ask the question, let alone look at the results. And I think we were sort of saying that, the number, I'm getting a good education at KLSD, 97%, that speaks volumes. I mean, in the end, the only metric isn't, student satisfaction surveys, but to get a sense that the students feel like they're getting a good education, and then some of these specific skills that were in the survey, that the teachers know who I am, treat me with respect, set high expectations. This is the learning commitment in numbers. And I just think that just as there's areas to focus on, I think it is it's important to appreciate, it's not all about, everything has to be 100%. It's very important to appreciate where we are, both in terms of what the results are and the way we are collecting, handling, manipulating, and thinking about the data, I think puts us in a very good place to keep our eye on the ball. Well done.
Thank you.
I would very much agree with that in the sense that for a school with such high academic output, like you would think that, sorry, you would think that would have like an inverse relationship with how the kids rated their high school experience. Like I would think at least that for a school that does so well, kids would be like, oh, you know what, high school is tough. I didn't really like it so much. So it's great to see that like our school district is yielding such good results academically, but also like with kids saying they actually enjoy their experience of high school. So it's good to see we're hitting both checkpoints.
That's a really nice point. Thank you for saying that, Aiden. And it actually reminds me of something we talked a little bit about during our tour of the high school the other day, where I think all of us were struck by, generally speaking, how happy the students seemed with each other and in their classrooms, and just the interactions in the hallway. It really seemed like a place where people felt pretty good and happy and eager to come to school, which is wonderful. So I think, you've just articulated that really nicely. Thank you. Other questions and comments? Yes, Scott.
So I'm going to build off of that, but in a kind of a negative way, but I don't want it to. But I completely echo everything that's been said. I think the results are fantastic, and I do think they fairly speak for themselves. But I'm going to focus on one thing that did concern me, and you touched on it a little bit, and it's from the graduate survey, and it's the managing stress line.
Yeah.
Where we've got more than a quarter of our students say that they found it very challenging. About half of our students who found it challenging are very, very challenging. And to me, that's worrisome. And I completely agree that that's not unique to Katona-Lewisboro or unique to Westchester. But I do think that in terms of when I think of what we're doing for what we're supposed to be doing, we're supposed to be preparing them academically. But if all we do is prepare them academically, then we failed them, in my opinion. So to me, that's a troubling line, and I'd like to see us. I wish I could say this is what we should be doing or what the answer is, but I do think that that's something that we shouldn't lose sight of, and something that I'd like to see us put a focus on.
Yeah.
There was also a PTO put on a presentation last night with counseling office about managing anxiety for students, which was actually really well attended, and I thought very interesting. They had tons of resources. It was very useful.
It was our staff members who presented that last night, and they did the same presentation for staff on our recent Staff Development Day, so it is something that we are equally concerned about.
Right, and I would say, and since I said I don't have the answers, but I'm going to throw out something that it's not necessarily the answer, but we do say that our students are happy here, and they seem to be engaged, certainly with the participation rate in the senior survey and in the graduate survey. If we could get some of them maybe in their first year back to come and talk to to the seniors about their first year experiences, I think that might be something that could be helpful or useful.
Sure.
I also would suggest that maybe we should ask a question about managing stress or anxiety in the senior survey, since we're getting such a high participation rate in the senior survey, and we might as well get some insight into what students are feeling about their ability to manage stress while they're here.
Those might be great questions also for the actual in-person meetings that we have with the groups of students, because sometimes when they answer the question, we're not getting enough, and to get that follow-up when we have them there. So we could introduce that this year, even in those meetings.
'Cause this is another one of those areas where I'm not sure what to make of it if only 91 students, but still, I mean, it's still important to look at it, but I'd really love to also be able to look at it for our existing senior survey, since we've got a captive audience of seniors taking the survey.
They can't leave until we say so.
Yeah. Yeah, now relax.
Yeah. But district-wide, it has been a focus this year and last, but I think each year probably even more so it should be. When you think about social emotional learning and some of the mental health work, recognizing when we're having mental health difficulties, not having stigma around those things, and being able to talk about your feelings. And it's so common that high school students in particular feel anxious and worried, and the college process certainly doesn't help with that. So even though we're doing things and parents are doing things in their homes and we're trying to do things at school, they live in this world where there's this constant pressure and that eats away after a while. And for some students, when they go to college, that really amps up. So, it's something I think we should pay lots of attention to, and we'll continue to do so. But I'd like the idea of bringing students back after year one, because I think that can be, feeling really relevant for students. You have a brother, right, who's in college, so you know, you know all about it.
So can I just be really brief? Just, I know there's some young kids in the audience, and I think it's important that we turn to them as quickly as we can. But, but I'll just say, we ought to use management by exception here. I think I'm just echoing what Bill said. This is a really useful tool, and in the past, we didn't have such statistics, and it was really difficult to know what kids were feeling in the school, and now we have a lot of really valid data. You mentioned the 12%, for example, of students who said that they were somewhat dissatisfied or dissatisfied. And we should be doing things like that, right? So we should be looking at how do we manage stress for the kids. We should be looking at, I noticed in computer science, for example, that some of the AP results weren't, I think was the computer science principles, also macroeconomics, I think business. So there were some things. So there's quite a few things throughout this whole survey that kind of pop and make me want to delve into the details a little bit. But I think the bottom line is that now that you have the data, you can begin to start to manage it from maybe the tougher, more thorny issues like stress management and so on. And I'll just leave it at that. But I think there's a really super useful tool. Thank you.
Thank you.
For a statistic, like, how would you rate your satisfaction or with your experience in high school? I think if a student were to select somewhat dissatisfied or very dissatisfied, maybe adding like a sub question like where does this dissatisfaction come from or something like that could be helpful. I don't know.
We actually just talked about that today,
Yeah.
that if they're made those choices, maybe we could have another pop-up box to get more information, like you're saying.
Right, because we try to keep as many of the questions consistent as possible over years so that we can compare them, but if we could add that level of detail, that would be really helpful to us.
I did have just one question, kind of continuing in Scott's line of negativity, but not with regard to Katona Lewisboro, more just with regard to our role as advocates for public education. On the slide for grades 3 to 8 math results, I just can't help but inquire around how are we supposed to process the grade 8 math results across New York State? Or honestly, even the grades 3 through 8 math results. I mean, I think to me, this really just begs the question, what is the grade 3 to 8 math assessment? And how useful a tool is it? And if it is a useful tool, why are only 33% of students across the state in grade 8 scoring proficiency? That's of great concern. I guess the only good way to look at it is that the percentage of students achieving proficiency has increased from 22 to 30 to 33. But can you provide some insight into what is the conversation at the state level about whether the test is appropriate developmentally, whether across the state we do have an endemic crisis around math instruction? If somebody could just provide some insight.
That's not a small question at the, towards the end of the meeting, but it's obviously a very important question. And it's really the question, I would say it's a national question, not just a New York State question, because when you look at standardized test results over the last 20 years in our country, and that's been so much of the conversation around education reform in our country over 20 or 30 years, that's what you see across. You see very little change, and you see results that, again, outside of districts like ours, people are not particularly happy with. And then you hear debates about changing cut scores on the tests and changing the tests from year to year. And, you know, there's no easy answers to give you. It has to do with many things, many of them not related to what's happening in the schools themselves. Very large and complicated question. Piece of why, it's a little piece of why we're focused on the learning commitment and things in addition to test results, because we know that not just by focusing on test results that improvement happens. I think, you know, our country has done a good job of proving now for the last 40 years.
And I'm not sure, exactly what the conversation is at the state level, but I can tell you, speaking with teachers almost everywhere, there's a lot of worry about that because, each year we wait for the scores to come back. So first of all, you're giving the assessment in one grade. You don't get the scores back until very, very late in the summer before the next grade begins. And then after the scores come out, you get cut scores, which change every year. So the level at 2 where you might consider a student for AIS or not, those things change all the time. So that makes you a little skeptical. And then how closely they are related. They are related to the standards. And I think very few teachers would say they have issue with those standards. They're strong standards. But again, the way the tests are designed, and then the untimed piece, when you think about anxiety, it's interesting that it was really meant, I do think it was meant with good intent to say, let's take away the time constraints and take away some anxiety. But for many students who experience anxiety and obsess, you have experiences where students are sitting there all day and they don't want to hand in their assessments. So there are so many things to consider, and I think it's why multiple measures are really important, and we can't forget what we're seeing in our classrooms every day. So it's just keeping in perspective. You don't want to ever say, we don't want to look at this data because it's important, and I think patterns are really important, but also looking at individual students and thinking about the big picture. But I'd say many teachers have concerns about how much prep we do, the importance of them, and how much faith we can place in the results.
I think this was a place also, though, with good intention,
Yes.
that this was a place that students were being left behind, right? If they couldn't get through some of those hurdles in math, they were not going to be successful. And I think so that was the state's attempt to make sure that it was rigorous. But I agree, we have to really look deeply then about what's building up to that, right? Because that shouldn't be the outcome if we
Right.
have the appropriate instruction in place along the way.
Thank you. Thank you. This was a really great conversation. Thank you, everybody, and thank you so much to the administration for all of the attention to detail and thoughtful analysis that went into this. It was a lot of work. Thank you. So that does bring us at long last to public forum. Thank you so much for your patience, to our community members, to our students. It's our turn to listen to you now, and please know that in public forum, we really are listening carefully. This is your opportunity to share your thoughts or concerns with us. Please also know that we're not going to engage in back and forth for any of you who are new to a board meeting or to public forum. We really are going to use this time only to listen to you. And then later at the very end of the meeting, there is an opportunity for the board to enter into dialogue again and to perhaps discuss comments or concerns that you raised this evening, or to ask members of the administration to follow up as appropriate. So let me just take a look. I know a few of you have signed up already, and I believe first is Lauren and Ben Wismuller. Welcome.
Shorter than I guess. Maybe move the whole base. I'm Lauren, and this is Ben. Ben, he's in 8th grade. And I'm here to talk about Latin in the middle school. I don't really know anything about Latin in the high school yet. So this morning before leaving for school, Ben asked me if I knew what quid pro quo meant. While I understand the implication, I was not familiar with the word-for-word translation that he provided me. Would you like to?
This for that.
So for anyone whose argument is that Latin is a dead language, I think we as a nation have discredited that somehow. I understand that language study is a valuable part of middle school and high school studies. However, the value is not limited to being able to converse in the chosen language. Latin holds its value by offering a bridge to common and technical abbreviations and terms, a link to an extensive vocabulary, and a jumping-off point for other Romance languages. It's a great foundation to begin in 6th grade, and it's a program the district should be proud of. I've been advise that the fate of the program rests with the community who has been consistently choosing to ignore Latin as an option. For my family, the 5th grade selection, because that's when they decide, only in 5th grade, as young as 5th grade. The selection is understood to mean a commitment for up to 7 years of study. And when given all the insight I've been able to provide both of my children, I have a 6th grader also, and a 2nd grader, they've both chosen Latin. We were surprised then to know that the classes were in danger of not running. And in fact, for my 6th grader, we were not able to get her into a Latin class last year because of the low enrollment. And so we approached fellow students and parents on multiple occasions, and we got feedback saying that we didn't know Latin was a choice, despite it being on the screen or the page, or we didn't know what a Latin class was going to be like, so we didn't want to pick it. Everyone knows what Spanish is like, or French, though I understand that few students, relatively speaking, choose French. Separate discussion. So I guess what, I'm sorry, I lost my spot. They said maybe they would consider it, but they felt discouraged that it would never happen, or it wasn't really worth their having to contact someone to change their selection, and they would probably be discouraged in the process. So my complaint, so to speak, is that the district does not give the same types of explanations on the language choices as it does for music choices when students are in 5th grade. It's my understanding that the students are explained the differences between band, orchestra, chorus, and the option of discovering music. But no one talks to them about what they're going to learn in their world language classes, the potential benefits or options that are going to exist for them. And as my 8th grader can say, and to use part of your presentation, he would rate his Latin instruction as good, very good. And it's an enriching and enjoyable class, and definitely seems to be in line with the Katona-Lewisboro learning commitment of a class that really supports him. So he promised me he would say one sentence. So
I look forward to Latin every day.
thank you.
Thank you.
for
Thank you both. Thank you.
listening.
Thank you for
And-
taking the time to speak with us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you
I'm
both.
sorry, it sounded like your voice was coming from over there.
Thank you. Thank you both. I think next is Alicia DiGaetano.
Alicia.
Oh, I'm sorry, Alicia.
Okay, just to start off, if I mess something up, I had notes, but they didn't save on my phone because I messed it up. So my name's Alicia DiGaetano. I'm an 8th grader and I take Latin. And I think it should be saved because why should we have a chance to better our education that the future 6th graders should not? For example, Latin has many historical contexts, obviously, and obviously has many foundations in many other languages. Also for the argument that no one wants to take Latin, if no one wanted to take Latin, no one would be putting up a fight about it not being offered. I also think that we should learn Latin because again, about the notes. It betters my vocabulary. Also, it makes you seem a whole lot smarter if you use certain vocabulary more than others. And you learn that vocabulary by using the roots of the words that you learn in Latin. And if you learn the roots of the words you learn from everyday English words, I was going to say it. I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. I forgot what I was going to say.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Good job, thank you.
Thank you. And Lorraine Gallagher, please. I'll definitely open it up afterwards, but you were next. Are any other children waiting to speak with us?
good.
Put it on the floor.
We had to lower it. No, you first. Hi. I'm Talia Derone. I'm in 5th grade. And I really want to take Latin because my mom is a journalist and I want to be a writer. And Latin helps with vocabulary and it'll help me get a better score on my SATs. That way I can go into some really advanced writing school that I have never heard of.
My name is Maria De Gaetano. I'm in 5th grade, and I want to take Latin because my sister took Latin.
Yay! I'm done. I didn't do it like she did it.
Good job.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your patience. Okay, Lorraine, thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I want to say I was a little surprised at the last board meeting that the board decided it was not going to vote on whether or not to retain our mascot after the board determined that it should be part of its leadership goal. That leadership goal encompasses fostering an inclusive, welcoming environment at the board meetings and in the operation of the district, so as to improve congeniality, trust, and a shared sense of purpose among all school community members. Leadership would have been voting and standing behind your decision. Although I do appreciate Superintendent Selesnik's thoughtful presentation and leadership on the issue. I wish that this board had considered first how to approach such a sensitive subject before diving in. Instead, this ended up in once again dividing our community in what is already a divisive world. I've spent many nights since then with student athletes around my kitchen table discussing this issue at their request. I need you to understand that now not only they feel that their school identity is being taken away from them, but they also feel disrespected by the board. They feel that their voice and their vote did not matter. I think it's very important to hear that your students feel that they don't have your respect anymore. They wish that they were respectfully treated like the young adults that they are. They are good kids, dedicated to representing their school proudly. They also now have asked me many times, what happens next? They feel that they've been left hanging in this situation. Now, I hope the administration is able to step in to help resolve this situation. The community needs healing. There are social media posts out there where there are some school board members and their families, members of these pages, that are run by the people who supported the Change Our Mascot, claiming that the rest of the school population who is against the change are white supremacists, bigots, and without conscience. They denigrate our school community merely for being white. That's been a comment out there. That is the problem with our area, is that we are white. They're saying this about some people that care the deepest about this school and this community, the people that give up their nights, weekends, and holidays to support our students. I am disappointed that none of the board members or their families that are on these pages have stepped in to stop this reverse hate speech. It is a bit ironic. I would hope this board would be I hope that this would have been part of the board's leadership goal. I would like to see the mascot selection process involve the athletic department, the student athletes and their families, and the alumni to whom the mascot is most meaningful. There is a large contingent out there that was not in favor of this, and they're feeling neglected and left out and wondering what's going on next. I think there's a lot to prepare for this sudden change and a lot of things the board did not consider. I must admit I was a bit surprised at how casually the board took the news about the price tag associated with this change. I still think there are a lot of costs that weren't contemplated, things that would have helped ensure a smoother transition in the process. I also look at the needs of the school, included but not limited to a $13,000 price tag for local live to broadcast our games in the field and the gym and programs in the theater. We've been brainstorming on how to raise this money. It's difficult to get people to volunteer. And also there's a need for a new school scoreboard out on the contest field. The money for the mascot change could have been better spent here or on some other educational programs. Now instead, Those people who have been called racists and bigots will be the ones looked to raise the money needed to continue to meet the needs that are not covered by the district. These people are discouraged and deflated by their recent treatment. And as someone who spent hours fundraising for our schools, it's not going to be easy to find replacements to these people if they walk away. And there's rumors also that I've heard that we're going to lose some scholarship funding as a result of the change. So these are some of the costs that weren't really contemplated, I think. In closing, I hope the district has a plan to heal the divide caused by this mascot change. This is the best way that you can meet your stated leadership goal. Thank you.
Thank you. Is anybody else waiting to speak with us? That's it for the sign up, but we're happy to hear from any members of the community. Yes, please join us.
Okay.
Do you mind introducing yourself since we don't
I'm
have your
Liz
name?
Katz.
Thank you.
And I know you've made your decision, and although I requested the respect of the vote that the students made, and the youngest group being the current juniors, I understand that you're still moving forward. So be it, and I can't change the Board of Ed's decision, although I'm a little disappointed. As Lorraine had mentioned, the name calling on social media by those who are for the change is very worrisome to me. Last night, I broke down in tears. I couldn't take it anymore. Seeing the names that people that I look up to or people I volunteered with have been called. I've read many of these posts, comments, screenshots over time, taken on other pages. Some even posted by Board of Ed members' spouses, and comments that followed by those posts. It's very heartbreaking to me, as these people are the ones that are same people putting their time, heart, and soul into the things that need to be volunteered for at the school to make the experiences of these students to be the best it can be while they attend our schools. I ask that you make the short time that we have before you change the mascot, that you ask the community for their feedback. Even if it's something like a Survey Monkey or something like that, just ask the community. We are all a part of this community. I need to understand a few other things also. These extended classes that are there for the students that need additional support. In the past, those classes had an additional teacher in those classrooms to help the students that needed that support, but now they are not. How is it that, was it a budget cut? Because if there was a slush fund that we have to change the mascot, why don't we have this budget for the support that many of these students need? There are some fantastic teachers that were cut to half-time and three-quarter time. Why not put them back to full-time and utilize them as support for these students that need them in these extended classes? It does make a difference for these students. Hold on. And it was just interesting to me how we have the money for that, but we don't have it for where we really need it for these students. And Mr. Chang, in reference to your concerns